In this lesson, lesson 6, we'll be looking at temporal quality of the data. So previous lesson was about the spatial quality and spatial accuracy, how we check that. But now we're going to change the focus a little bit and going to look at the temporal data. So when we talk about temporal data, we'll see what are the elements and of course how do we evaluate, and finally how we correct any problems that we see with the temporal data. Obviously, temporal data is related to the time and date, or time and date. And I'd just like to ask, do you use any data that has time component as integral part of the data set that you use in your work or maybe in a current project?
I do. So my project, basically, one of the biggest aspects of it is time, because all of my samples have been taken over a period of 10 years. So I have to visualize everything, all of my results against time, as well as I have to show the land use change over time on the actual map. So I've been working a lot with temporal quality.
Okay, that's excellent. Thank you for that, Zahar. So talking about that temporal data, there are three elements that we are considering when talking about the temporal data quality. The first one that we see on the left-hand side is time measurement accuracy. And by that, we are looking at how closely is that time with true time. So example in here that we see, we may have some sort of report that being submitted. And when you look at the dates in this particular case, you see that one is really standing out as incorrect. So if we are doing survey in a field, obviously it wasn't recorded in 1900. We didn't have computers in 1900. And that's the one that is incorrect in terms of accuracy. Second element of that quality is consistency or correctness. Correctness in terms of order of events. So example that is easily illustrating this in here is that we see that we have actually two columns in attribute table that store the date, and one is a date of sightings and the other one of editing dates. And for one record, the top record, the problem is that we see that the editing is valid date, April 9th, but it's happening prior to sighting of that particular event, which is April 29th. So the order is not correct. It cannot be edited before it was sighted. All the others may have exactly the same date, but in this case, somehow it was different. The third element of the temporal quality is validity. And that validity comes in terms of format. What we see here, again, US date format, month, day, year. And looking at these, we see that we have these two bottom ones with incorrect month. So 24 and 31st, obviously the dates, the days, not the month values. So we see that we have three different elements of this quality, and we have to check for all these three elements. And Zahara, did any specific checks for your data in terms of temporal quality? Sorry to put you on the spot.
When I received, no worries. When I received the data, I had edit dates as well as the sample take dates, which I did check just to make sure that everything was correct. So I went through that. But the main thing that I had to add in terms of temporal data was the ending date, technically, because when you're visualizing it on a timeline, you want certain features to be filtered out, and there was no field to allow those fields to be filtered out. So I had to add that, and I had to do a lot of changing around of the ending date just to make sure that it could be visualized on the timeline correctly and the correct field filtered out of the next field.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So now when we look at that temporal quality and how do we change these, something that you have already mentioned about. One is to update fields, and in your case, you created a new field and put these new value of end dates. But sometimes it's simply that we can change the format. Again, with the time in past, we didn't really have many data sets that were capturing date, time, or date and time information. Over the years, we have more devices that can record time. So it's coming from GPS devices, but then also for smart devices like phones and tablets that will use applications like field maps, Survey 123, or other apps that might be custom made. They can also record date and time natively as a part of that capture process. In most cases, that will be date time or date or time field. Now in RGS Pro 3.4, we have more options for recording date and time, date only, time only, or date and time. And that is fine. It's going to be a valid entries. But if you have an attribute table that has a text field and you type in the date or time, there's a possibility of error. And that is simply because somebody has to type in these values. So when we have these possibilities, it's likely that there will be some error. And the best way to do this is to change that format from text into a date. Most likely you will do this by creating a new field and using calculate field, by using your source from a text and putting it into a date field or whatever format that be. And just one little trivia question. So if we are talking about date fields, date and time field, what is the full definition or content of date time field? So since we're talking about the date and time, the first part of that will be 2025. Oops, 2025. So it's a year, then a month, and then date 23. Then we need to include the time. So that will be 9, 11, let's say 05. And we also need to include AM, PM. So this is full definition of the date time field. If we use that date time field. Again, we have some other options that we can use in our GIS Pro, so you make sure that you use whatever is best for that particular data sets or calculation or analysis that you want to do. Again, if you have this full date and time field, you can extract information from there by using Python, Arcade, or any other programming option. So just a reminder of what we actually have and how we can do that. In some cases, it's not really possible to change the format to do the updates, and you actually have to go to recreate that information or even go in a field and recollect the information that was originally created but had inaccurate information. Now we have an activity in here, and that activity, if you are watching this recording, is in your workbook on page 6-5, and it may take about 6 or 7 minutes. And here we have 3 different scenarios, and we're going to evaluate these scenarios. So please pause the recording, and after you've written down your answers in a workbook, unpause for review of answers for these 3 scenarios. So let's have a look at these scenarios. And scenario 1 is about fire hydrant data. and the scenario states, after combining two pothole reporting datasets, you are reviewing fields in the combined dataset for completeness. To review the fields, you sort the date_collected field in ascending order and notice that the minimum value is 1/31/2022. Then you sort the date_collected field in descending order and notice that maximum value is 31/12/2022. Which data quality element is evaluated in this scenario? Amber, what do you think it might be in this case?
I think we are evaluating temporal validity. So we're evaluating whether the dates are actually valid compared to each other as well.
Yeah, that's correct. Thank you. Scenario number 2, highway improvement project. For a highway improvement project, you are tracking issues that have been reported and fixed. You compare the values in a different date fields and notice inaccuracies for one highway segment. Several reports were made in a certain month and a year, but one record has dates that shows that the fix was made before the issue was reported. Which data quality element is evaluated in this scenario? Zahara, what's your opinion on this one?
I think it'll be temporal consistency because we're comparing values and looking for inaccuracies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's perfectly valid. That's correct. Thank you. In the last scenario, wildlife observations, a conservancy project sent you a data that contains spotted owl sightings reported over the last 10 years. While sorting the date fields to review the values, you notice that most of the dates are for the past few years, but one date reports year is 1919. Which data quality element is evaluated in this scenario? So Adele, what do you think?
I think it should be time measurement accuracy because 1919 is definitely not an accurate date time for this scenario.
That's correct. So thank you all for that. And now we looked at these different options, and we want to talk a little bit about currency versus accuracy. So there was something mentioned already in this example. And when we talk about currency, what that means is this data for this particular period? And when we talk about accuracy, as we discussed earlier, yes, it's all valid in all three components. So that is correct, but the data is actually historical. So this is something that you need to think a little bit about, that historical data versus accurate data. And there could be some potential trade-off. And have you had any cases like that? The data was accurate, but not for the correct time period that you need. I know, Zahara, you had 10 years, but was there any problems that you had in terms of data not covering that particular 10-year period?
So the data did cover the 10-year period correctly. I think the issue I had was that when I was filtering the data, there was no period for each of the data. So say the sample was taken on 1st of January 2019, that would just be the date. But then the moment on the timeline you went past that date would stay on your map throughout the entire time period. So I had to create an end date, which I guess would be not accurate, but it was just because there wasn't really a period for the samples, but the purpose that the end date served was just that it would be filtered out of the timeline. So just for visualization's sake. So I would say that that was more of a currency thing, just to see how it was visualized.
Yeah. And I hope you have documented that addition in the metadata.
Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. And this brings us to the exercise 6. For this exercise, we will look at evaluating temporal consistency and look at the validity, and that is going to take about 25 minutes. So if you're watching this recording, please pause the recording, and after you finish the exercise, unpause for lesson review questions. Now we finish the exercise and we have only 2 review questions for this lesson. Question number 1, where would you find information about the temporal components of a data set? How would you do that?
I would say first check the attribute table. And if no luck, then I would recommend reviewing the metadata of the data set or the schema.
Yeah, okay. So all 3 methods are there. Like you said, my first one is looking at the attribute table, seeing what is in there. I don't really have a good habit of checking the metadata first. Thank you. Question number 2. An analyst is inspecting attribute of a feature class and notices that some datasets are in the future. Which temporal accuracy component does this example violate? A, temporal consistency, B, temporal validity, C, time measurement accuracy, or D, time measurement completeness?
I think this one should be time measurement accuracy due to the inaccurate time.
That's correct. Thank you. So this is all we had for this lesson. And looking at the time information, again, you may not encounter that often, but it's good to know how we can deal with temporal data and how we can evaluate and fix this temporal information. So the next lesson that we're going to look at is going to be a little bit different, and it's going to be about thematic accuracy.